In this video, I'll be going over the graphics objects. So the scene I'm loading is just the one I've loaded before with the pre-made models, but the scene does use the graphic objects. So the four different graphic objects we have would be color, texture, and then color texture with lighting. And in the model scene, here's where we create the graphics objects. So yeah, we have four different ones, and based off which one that we're making, so as an example, the texture light graphic object, it requires a pointer to the texture light shader and then a pointer to a model object. And so that's how we would create it, and then I'll go into the base class. So here's just the base class for it. All graphic objects have a model that we can set, and that's really the only thing that they all share in common. It's just a model. Start with graphic object color. So here's for the color shader. Um, the unique things for the color shader would just be setting the color, and obviously you set the world for the graphic object. Uh, and since for the graphic objects, or yeah, for the graphic objects or the models, you can change a specific mesh for a model. For the graphic object, I have an array of vectors for the different mesh colors. So here's just we're creating and setting up pointers for the shader in the model, just setting the color, and setting it in general just sets all the mesh colors to that color, or we could set a specific mesh color, or specific mesh's color. Just setting the world, and then for the render for the color, it sets the model to context, um, and it sends the world color to the shader, and then just renders the specific mesh for the model, and it's just a for loop that goes through all the meshes. And this format's going to be pretty much the same for the other graphic objects. So for texture, it's just setting textures instead of colors. Other than that, it's basically the same, and I have an array of texture pointers for the different meshes. But yeah, it's basically the same, except we're just setting textures instead of colors. Uh, except in the render, in the for loop, instead of obviously uh, sending a color to the shader, we're just setting the texture for the shader. So show here. So with the shader, we're setting the world and color. With the texture shader, we could just send the world to the shader once, and then we just keep updating the texture, resource, and sampler, and then we could just render the mesh. And now for color light. So color light, again, similar thing to the other ones, except now we can set a material instead of just a color or a texture. And here's the struct for that material for ambient, diffuse, and specular. And we have an array of materials for the different meshes. Um, and it's the same kind of logic, except now we're just setting materials. Um, yeah, so we just have a for loop. We just send the world and material for the mesh and render that mesh. Now for the texture light. Now here, for the texture light, we are setting a material and we're also setting a texture. But other than that, it's basically the same again. We have a struct for materials. We have an array of materials and an array of texture pointers. So it's just kind of a combination of the color light and the texture graphic object. see. So yeah, it's basically the same. Yeah, and show that should be it for the graphic objects.